Let's talk about tips for making decisions. Specifically, I'm going to give you 7 tips to help you make better decisions faster and with less anxiety. This is all coming to mind because my wife and I had to make a major decision this weekend. And so I've been thinking about the process that we went through, how to improve that, and thought I would pass on some suggestions to you. So I'm going to give you 7 specific tips. Number 1. Put the decision in long-term perspective. Here's what I mean by this. I like to ask myself the question, 5 years from now, will this decision matter? Hey, if it doesn't, then don't stress too much about this decision. Now, we all know that sometimes a small decision can put you in a place where a bigger decision can happen. That's true. But if we get too hung up on that, we're going to get really bad anxiety over the process. So just ask yourself, is this decision going to matter in 5 years? If not, don't stress about it too much. It's really not that important. But if it's yes, this decision will matter a lot in 5 years, then you're definitely going to want to budget some more time and effort into that process. This brings back one of the key decisions that I constantly amazed by. The number of people who make decisions for like the parents of their children when they're drunk in a bar. And it's like, okay, all right. Number 2, focus on the core of the problem. Here's the way I like to do it. My coach likes to tell me to do this. He says, when you're getting ready to make a decision, write down this. I'm trying to solve. And I actually take this card and I put it in front of me as I go through the process of making that decision. Because what it does is it focuses me on the problem that I'm trying to solve. Because here's what happens when you start making a decision. Anything outside of that problem that you're trying to solve can be ignored. Because what oftentimes happens is when you're trying to make this decision, you feel like you got to make these other 16 decisions in order to make this one decision. And oftentimes you don't have to make those decisions. Now, let me give you an example of this. Let's say you're considering a move to another place. And right now you don't have a car. You're in a city, and so you're working with Uber and things like that. And you're saying, okay, if I move to Omaha and have to drive a long way every day, then I am going to need to buy a car. Okay, that's part of the decision. You're going to want to have that be part of the decision. But what kind of car, how big, how much to pay for it, even how to pay for it, are actually things that are outside of the core decision. And so keep returning to that question. What is the problem that I'm trying to solve? And then ask yourself frequently, are my thoughts right now contributing to helping me solve that problem? Or are they working on other problems that may need to be solved, but are not part of this key decision? And this comes down to, back to the car example, limiting the variables. So oftentimes we get way too many variables in a conversation. And so what we need to do is consider those that are important and relevant to the decision and basically ignore the rest. How much should I buy this car or that car? All those kinds of questions. The only thing that really matters in this is, as part of the decision of whether you should move to Omaha or not, you ought to be deciding, okay, I need to get a car if I'm going to move there, because it's an important part of living in that particular city. And so one of the things that I recommend you do in this process of limiting the variables is to actually separate logic from emotion. Now, unfortunately, you need to think about both. Both logic and emotion play key roles in the process of making a decision, but don't mix them up. What most people tend to do is they jump back and forth between logic and emotion as they're making the decision, and consequently, they can never make the decision because it becomes far too emotional. Emotion should be considered, but I like to think about the logical elements first, because if it doesn't make sense logically, then it just doesn't make sense, and you don't even have to think about the emotional part. Number 4, identify where you're uncomfortable in this decision. So anytime you're struggling with a decision, there are usually 1 to 3 different things in that decision that are causing you to be uncomfortable about making it. And so I suggest you actually make part of your effort to identify these are the areas where I'm uncomfortable. I like to write them down, put them on a piece of paper, circle the areas that I'm uncomfortable. And then when the creativity starts, I like to consider the options. How can I resolve that discomfort? Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't because that's not the right decision for you. But sometimes you can resolve that discomfort. And so sometimes I like to ask, how can I change the deal to resolve that discomfort? So oftentimes a decision has to be made because there's some deal in the workings, something you have to purchase, some job offer, some opportunity to go and be part of a new business, something like that. And so sometimes the question is, how can I change the deal to lessen my discomfort? The second aspect of this is, how can I change my actions to increase comfort? So if it's going to mean that you're going to have to get up earlier every day, all right, you don't necessarily have to shift the deal to that. To do that, you might have to change your actions in that process. Number 5 is incredibly important, and that is this: think long term. Because if you're thinking long term, you'll tend to make better decisions in the short term. So I like to ask myself this key question: what decision will I wish I had made 5 years from now? So if this is one of those long-term effect decisions that we talked about right at the first of this, if you ask yourself, what is the decision I will have wished I would have made 5 years from now? So let's say you're deciding, should I go get an MBA or not? Well, 5 years from now, will you wish you had that, or will you wish you didn't have that? And by the way, you should consider, will you wish you had that debt versus will you wish you not had that debt? But in the process, if your salary does what my salary does, when I went from a non-MBA to an MBA, I increased my salary by $70,000 a year. Didn't take long to pay off the increased debt as a result, because we didn't change our lifestyle. We just poured all that money into paying off the debt. And so if you look at it in terms of what decision will I wish I would have made 5 years from now, that can be a huge driver to help you make a core decision. And oftentimes there's some discomfort around this because you say, but I'm going to have to do X, and X is hard. And I like to go back to this. I can put up with blank for blank amount of time. So I can put up with getting up early. I can put up with getting some student loan debt. I can put up with, these different things for X amount of years. And am I willing to do that? Yeah, I'm willing to do that. And so then the discomfort can go away because I see a higher return on the other end of that. Number 6, record your thoughts in writing. Get out a piece of paper. And what I like to do is I like to start that piece of paper with this question, with what am I trying to solve at the top? And so I write, what am I trying to solve? And then I write what I'm trying to solve. And then down at the bottom of the page, I write, what is the decision that I wish I would, that I will wish I would have made? And I put that at the bottom. Because here's the thing, 5 years, if you take what are the things I'm trying to solve, and then at the bottom, you put down, here's 5 years from now, what's the decision I wish I would have made? Then you start looking at all the elements in between, and are they consistent with the top point? Are they consistent with the bottom point? And it makes a ton of sense and really relieves the anxiety and the pressure in this as you realize, okay, I'm focusing on the right problem. I'm throwing out everything that isn't applicable, and I'm focusing on the decision that is the best decision for me in the long term, in a 5-year period. Then make a decision based on all that. That decision could be yes, and it could be no. And that's just fine. If it's not right for you, then the answer should be no. And then I recommend you sleep on it so that you really can let your subconscious mind can work on it. You're taking yourself out of the pressure and thinking and sleeping on it. And then in the morning, ask yourself, do I still feel comfortable with this decision that I made? If yes, then go for it. If no, Then ask, what part of me is uncomfortable with this decision that I made? And then you go back through that discomfort exercise that we did before, which is, what parts of the deal am I uncomfortable with, and what parts of my actions am I uncomfortable with, and resolve those, get creative, and you might be able to come up with another different way of doing things that can make that deal, that can make this decision be something that is comfortable for you. And then remake the decision, and then ideally sleep on it and just keep doing this over and over again until you arrive at a point where you can make a decision, sleep on it, and when you wake up in the morning, you're still happy with that decision that you made. And then finally, I suggest you, at the end of this, make a commitment. I had a friend of mine, he came to me, he was 48 years old, and he says, Don, you've been married for years, same woman the entire time. And he said to me, what's your advice on marriage? And I said this, when you marry her, you've made a commitment. Stick with it for the rest of your life. If you're not comfortable, then don't marry her now. But if you are, don't break it, don't do anything, and don't question your decision. Just be committed and go forward. Make this your new plan, your new way of doing things. And now I'm stepping back from this marriage conversation. So you made this decision in your life, whatever it is, you've gone forward, and don't think about it, don't question it until 6 months. Reevaluate again in 6 months. Is this still right for me? And if it's not, you've given everything to it for 6 months. Now you've earned the right to change that if it's not right for you at that point. The thing you shouldn't do is 3 days later, question, a week later, question, and keep questioning, because then you never make the commitment. You never make the progress. You never fully invest yourself in it. And invariably, when people do that, it's going to fail. So 7 tips to help you make better, stronger decisions with less anxiety, less frustration, less worries in this process. And by the way, you make better decisions as a result of doing this. My favorite one in that process, what's the decision I will have wished I would have made 5 years from now? Thinking that will help you make a better decision almost every time. What's your thoughts on this? Let me know in the comments. This is Don Crowther saying, just go do this stuff.